Nice to see everyone again. Yes, so that was where I was a few weeks ago. I was at Robinhood. So let's see. When Colette and Alec first asked me to present on relationships, a huge wave of imposter syndrome washed over me because what do I know about relationships? And I kid you not, my first inclination was to call up my therapist because I pay her to tell me what to do in relationships. And joking aside, she was out of town. So left to my own devices, I started to think about past work relationships, the good ones and the not so good ones. And I narrowed in on one specific question, which is how can researchers build relationships that drive impact? And by impact, I mean that research is informing key decisions around brand, product, and the business. Okay, so I have some good news and I have some bad news, and you'll know why you're looking at this slide in a minute. The good news is that as researchers, we have key skills, training, and expertise that are the core ingredients of relationship building. The bad news is, more often than not, we're not channeling these skills for relationship building and instead solely using them for our research. So today I'm going to talk about how we can take all of our training, all of our special skills as researchers, and use them to create really strong work relationships. Okay, so as researchers, we have a lot of different types of relationships at work. We have what some people refer to as upward relationships with your manager and leadership. We have quote-unquote downward relationships with junior researchers, and if you're a manager, with your direct reports. And then there are sideways or horizontal relationships that we have with our research peers and with our cross-functional partners in product, design, engineering, etc. And that's really where I'm going to focus today, because these relationships with our cross-functional stakeholders are essential for getting our work implemented. Okay, so I'm going to start with a story of what not to do when building relationships. This is from my own experience. So let's see, many work moons ago, I moved onto a new team at a company I had been at for a while. And unsurprisingly, I got a whole new set of cross-functional stakeholders in product, design, engineering. And although I didn't know them professionally or personally, I knew their reputation. They were known to be insular, tight-knit, maybe a little political, and long story short, they were some of the key power brokers at the company. And I was intimidated. But I thought, I know, I'm gonna send each of them a calendar invite for a weekly one-on-one. We'll hang out, we'll schmooze. We'll get to know each other, we'll be besties in no time. So that's what I did. I fired off a calendar invite to each of them. And when it came time for our one-on-ones, I would set up in a conference room, this is before COVID, have my coffee, and I would wait. And I'd wait, and I would look down at my phone, I would Slack them, hey, are you coming? None of them would ever show up. So not one of them showed up for any of our one-on-ones. And the message was really clear. Like, they weren't making time for me, and they didn't care about the relationship. And so I felt like the new kid in middle school again, where I was trying to get in with the cool kids, and they were rejecting me. So what did I do? I got it in my head that I needed to attend their weekly group meeting. And I tracked down the clear leader of this group, who was the product lead, and I looked him in the eye, and I said, let's figure this out between us before it gets escalated. And he heard, if you don't invite me to that meeting, I'm gonna go to your boss. And he heard that, because that's what I basically said. And in that moment, I went from being a nobody to being persona non grata and was never able to rebuild trust with him again. Okay, so what did I do wrong? Basically everything. I made it about me and not the cross-functional stakeholders. I at no point considered what value research could bring to each of them. And perhaps most importantly, I was myopically focused on a pretty arbitrary goal of getting a seat at the table, going to this meeting. Essentially, I wasn't putting myself in their shoes. Getting a seat at the table is important, but it's the outcome, not necessarily the goal. Okay, so now that you know everything you should not do when forming cross-functional relationships, what should you do? Well, I'm a researcher, so of course I did a lit review, and long story short, there are some key themes that emerge in the literature. Basically, to form good work relationships, we should communicate, we should build trust, we should deliver what we said we're gonna deliver, so follow up on your commitments. So while this is useful, to me it seemed a little basic and not super actionable. How should we communicate? How should we build trust? Also, like, these are pretty generic. These are not specifically for researchers. So, for this talk, I put together a snazzy framework called RAVE, and hopefully that'll help, that cool acronym will help you remember it. But hopefully this will give you actionable tools to build relationships. RAVE stands for be real, be authentic, add value, and be explicit. And I'm just gonna dive right in. So by be real, I mean transparent communication about trade-offs and timelines. And when I found this quote, it really got to the heart of why I think it's important to keep it real, to be real. When two people always agree, one of them is unnecessary. And when we always say yes to cross-functional stakeholders and their requests, we're not adding as much value as we could as researchers. So it can feel pretty good to say yes when we get a cross-functional request. A stakeholder wants a globally representative survey of our entire customer base in 48 hours. Yes, I can do that. Another stakeholder wants a fourth round of usability testing, although there have been no changes in the designs and the product is going to ship in 2 days. Sure, no problem. It can feel like not saying yes is going to actually hurt your relationship with your cross-functional partner. The reality is exactly the opposite, that if you're always saying yes, it's going to be a lot harder to build trust. And that's because you're positioning yourself as a helper, as an assistant, and not as a partner. So then the question is, okay, how do I become a partner? One thing you can do is to shift the conversation from being yes or no to really being about different options. And to do this, you need a little bit of time, right? Like in the moment when someone comes to you being like, hey, I need this, or this is what we need to figure out, it's hard to come up with different approaches. So my knee-jerk reaction now when I get a request from stakeholders is to say, great, thank you so much, let me get back to you. And even if we're short on time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes can make a really big difference because that gives me the opportunity to take a step back and really think about like how else can we approach this? And most importantly, like what do I think we should do? And so the example of the survey that I mentioned earlier to globally representative of all customers in 48 hours, which seems pretty impossible. Maybe you suggest, okay, well, we can put a survey in product. It can pop up on, our landing page. That'll get us data in 48 hours. The downside is because customers won't be logged in, we won't be able to gather data on key variables such as tenure or age, things that are really important. Instead, and here's my recommendation, we should do an email survey and we can gather that information directly in the survey or pass it through if we have that data internally. It's going to take 7 days, so a bit longer, but we're going to get really useful data to make this important decision about XYZ. And what you've done by giving options is you've put yourself in a position where you're on the same level with your cross-functional partner, and together you're deciding a path forward, and you've placed yourself as an expert researcher because you have a point of view. So I don't want to pull any punches. It is hard to push back, especially when you're building relationships. I'm not sure I would suggest doing this right out of the gate. We can talk about that later if you all want to get into that. But I think the real call to action here is for research leaders to create environments on their teams that reward real talk, that reward feedback, that reward transparency, and most importantly, provide that air cover, provide that support when people on their team are pushing back. Because, as they say, culture is what you reward, and if you want a real culture, if you want real talk, you have to reward that. Okay, be authentic. So even though I'm up here giving you a framework, about how to build relationships, there is no one right way to do this, right? It's going to look different for each of us. The thing that I think is important is to approach this in a way that feels genuine, that feels real, that feels doable for you. And why does that matter? Who cares, right? Well, one idea is that if we're not being authentic, our cross-functional stakeholders are going to pick that up, right? Like, they're going to know, and it's going to make it harder to build trust. That turns out not to be true. It turns out we as humans are really bad at recognizing authenticity, so the fake it till you make it approach actually is a pretty good one. To me, the reason we want to find what works for us is because it makes relationship building, which is already pretty challenging, a little bit easier. And so I don't know about you, but whether it's going to the gym or relationship building, if it's something that like I don't want to do, doesn't feel right for me, always feels like an effort, I'm not going to do it. So the idea here is find things that feel right, bake them into your routine, and hopefully make them a habit. So just like being real, being authentic is also pretty challenging, especially for underrepresented groups who we know face bias and discrimination when bringing their authentic selves to work. It's also hard because there aren't a lot of diverse models to follow. Recently, there's been a lot of conversation about being vulnerable at work and how that can actually help you build relationships. And while I'm a super big fan of Brené Brown, who's a vulnerability advocate, and she defines vulnerability as admitting when you don't know something, admitting you made a mistake. To me, this feels a little bit reactive. It's how you show up in certain situations. So while really important, I was wondering, is there a way we can proactively figure out what authenticity looks like for us? Okay, so this might sound like it's coming straight from the self-help aisle at Barnes & Noble, but it is important, I think, to do some reflection about how you show up at work. And some questions you might want to ask yourself is, what unique value do you add? And how will cross-functional partners benefit from working with you? So I have worked with an amazing research colleague, and her special sauce, one of her many special sauces, was bringing together research insights, data science insights, insights from CX, and creating a holistic narrative that really drove action from leadership. Also, unsurprisingly, she was a really great writer and partnered with her cross-functional partners to write really crisp memos for leadership. And so she added quite a bit of value. And so you might be asking yourself, like, who cares? Why do I need to know what I bring to the table? Why does it matter? It's important because if you don't know what your value is, how can we expect our cross-functional stakeholders to recognize it? If we know, A, we can lean into it, B, we can even tell them, hey, I have a lot of experience doing this, or I'm pretty good at this. Let me take that off your plate, or let me help you with that. So it's pretty important to, I think, reflect on this, and also you can use it when you're getting a new job, because these are moments when you have to tell people how great you are. But doing this self-reflection is really important for authenticity. Okay, value. Yes, okay. So by value, I mean deliverables that help your cross-functional partners do their day-to-day jobs. And it's really important to be proactive when we're creating value. A lot of people, sorry, lost my place for a second. A lot of people inside and outside of research treat relationship building more in a laissez-faire manner, kind of show up and let things naturally happen. But so the question becomes, how can we put ourselves in the proverbial driver's seat when we're building relationships? And here is where applying our research skills, so treating relationship building exactly how you would a research project, can really help. So just like research, a good place to start is with some research questions. And think about your stakeholders as if they were your users, your customers, your participants. What do you need to know about them to be successful? So some things you might want to ask are, what do they need to deliver? Who is their primary stakeholder? How do they like to be communicated with? Next, generate some hypotheses, do some desk research. Feels pretty familiar. And while it might feel a little awkward to be generating some hypotheses about how your design partner likes to be communicated with when she's sitting, 5 seats away from you, it turns out that this exercise is really great at building empathy. It's also really good because it prepares you for the next step, which is asking them directly. Let me give you an example, again, from my past work life, because this is a little high level. So, product manager Matt was someone I was working on a product team with, and I was trying to build a stronger relationship with him. And so the first thing was, okay, what is he on the hook to deliver? And it was pretty obvious that he needed to move a adoption metric from 20%, where it kind of had plateaued, to 50% in 6 months. Like, this is what his team was responsible for. It was a big goal. That was on him. Recognizing that was actually really valuable, because what it made me do was frame all of my research in terms of that metric and how it was specifically going to help him get there. And so, unsurprisingly, he was interested. Basically tying a direct line between what I was doing and what he needed to accomplish made it easier to build that relationship. Next, it wasn't rocket science to know that his main stakeholder was his boss, the CPO. But again, acknowledging that early on made it so I would deliver executive summaries, bullet points, short videos that he could share, that I could share with his CPO, that made research look good, that made him look good, basically adding a lot of value. So from talking to Matt, I learned things that I wasn't expecting. The first thing is he was a new manager and cared deeply about his direct reports and wanted to make sure they were set up for success. So with that in mind, I made sure that they were brought along in the research, that they got relevant insights, that they were part of the process. And so he knew that I was helping them be successful. And then finally, team culture. It was really important to Matt that we had a fun, strong, bonded team, product team, and so some other researchers and I, we had a movie night with popcorn, but instead of movies, we watched research clips, and this was a fun bonding moment, and it was fun to talk about research together. But all of these things were important to Matt, and as a researcher, it helped. I leveraged these things to help him and hopefully added a fair amount of value. Okay, we're gonna skip these weird slides. Okay, all right, so coming towards the end, last is be explicit, and that doesn't mean say a bad word unless you need to, that's okay. What it means is be specific about who you're gonna build a relationship with. So you want to really target one or two people. And this doesn't mean ignore everyone else, right? It just means it's pretty hard to boil the ocean and create really strong relationships with everyone at the same time. So it's more of a prioritization exercise and an order of operations. What really targeting one or two people does also is it helps other people help you. So for example, with my direct reports, what I often will do is we'll figure out, okay, who is their main stakeholder that they're gonna build a relationship with? And then if I know, I can position them in the right place for success. So if they need to get in that meeting and they're having a hard time, I can help get them there. Or if I'm in a room with that person, I can be my direct reports hype person and really talk them up. But if I didn't know specifically who they were trying to build a relationship with, it would be a lot harder. And finally, identifying one or two people to go after enables you to figure out, okay, what does success look like? Is it being invited to that meeting? Is it being able to ask your cross-functional partner during performance review time to be a peer reviewer and them saying yes? Basically, what this does is it brings relationship building back down to earth and makes it tangible and actionable, just like our research. Okay, so back to the beginning. This is the original question I asked. How can researchers build relationships that drive impact? And of course, you've seen a lot of this slide. I want to zoom out really quickly before I tie things up and kind of give you kind of the take-home message. So relationship building, just like personal relationships take work. So work relationships take work. It's really important that as a discipline, we as researchers dedicate just as much rigor, just as much effort, just as much time to relationship building as we do our research. And to do that, a great and hopefully easy place to start is with our research skills that can help us build strong cross-functional relationships that drive impact. So thank you so much, and happy to answer questions.